This Spotlight Talk nearly marks the end of a robust season of programming with 11 artists from the Beyond exhibition visiting the museum over the summer. Throughout the summer, these artists have presented lectures, gallery talks, workshops, and engagements within the community. Tschabalala and Molly's programs this week mark the final of these engagements, those of which include several workshops in Springdale collaborating with the Teen Action and Support Center and the Stitches Group, as well as a special program here in the Great Hall tomorrow with Molly, Free and Not Yet. You'll want to be sure to come back here tomorrow. You don't want to miss this one. These programs developed by Tschabalala and Molly have significantly contributed to the conversation between our museum and our community on issues of art, social practice, culture, and so much more. And so it's an honor to introduce Tschabalala and Molly this evening. Tschabalala's, yes. Tschabalala Self is a New York-based artist who makes syncretic use of painting, printmaking, and assemblage to explore ideas surrounding the Black female body. Constructed with a combination of sewn, printed, and painted materials, Self's exaggerated depictions of bodies transverse a variety of aesthetic and craft traditions. The physiological and psychological characteristics of her figures also reflect Self's personal desire to articulate cultural attitudes and realities as they relate to race and gender. Her work has been included in solo and group exhibitions at the Tramway in Glasgow, the Nui Museum, and Art and Practice, among many others. She has held numerous residencies, both nationally and internationally, including a current residency at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Self received her Bachelor's of Arts from Bard College and her Master's of Fine Arts from Yale University, and is a 2017 recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant. Molly Larkey is a Los Angeles-based artist and writer. Her work combines elements of language, painting, sculpture, architecture, and craft, using fluidity of form and function to propose alternatives to existing systems. For Larkey, artworks are objects that convey meaning through their physical presence and thereby impact the way that the body relates to the physical world. Larkey has had solo exhibitions at the PS1 MoMA in New York, the Dutton Gallery in New York, Human Resources in Los Angeles, and the Commonwealth and Council in Los Angeles, among many, many others. Her work was featured in The Shape of Things to Come, the new sculpture, at the Saatchi Gallery in London. She holds a Bachelor's of Art from Columbia College and a Master's of Fine Art from Rutgers University. The conversation this evening will be moderated by Lauren Haynes, Curator of Contemporary Art here at Crystal Bridges. As the co-curator of the exhibition, The Beyond, it goes without saying that Lauren has worked very closely with both of these artists. We're delighted to have Tschabalala, Molly, and Lauren here this evening, so please join me in extending a very warm welcome to these artists.
Thank you, Moira, and thank you all so much for coming this evening. And thank you guys. I'm really excited. I think what Moira talked about, that this is really the culmination and the end of all of our programming for the Beyond. So thank you all for coming out and for being a part of it and for being a part of the exhibition. I thought, we could sort of talk a little bit about the work that you all have in the show, your practices in general, but also really would love to hear more about some of the programming and things that you've been doing while you're here, in addition to how that sort of relates to your artistic practice. And then we'll open it up for questions. So please keep questions in mind. And yeah, does that sound good? Yeah, sounds good. Awesome. So let's start in thinking about the works in the exhibition, and maybe if you each could talk a little bit about those specific works, but also sort of how your practice and how your work has developed up to this point. throughout your career. So no easy, small, quick question, quick answer. Yeah. And you're closest to me, Shaba, so you have to start. Okay.
I have 3 paintings in the exhibition. 2 of the works were made in 2017, and the larger work, Origin, that work was made specifically for this exhibition here at Crystal Bridges. When Lauren reached out to me, she expressed interest in showing the 2 smaller works that are actually part of a series of 3. And those 3 paintings actually made during a residency, I guess in the winter 2017 in Detroit. And I had made those works. I wanted to depict 3 separate individuals, but each female figure in those paintings was meant to be in like a different moment of like agitation. So that was kind of like the conceptual framework for those pieces. Formally, the ways in which those works were made was that I kind of pulled from the scraps from my studio to build out the figures. To give kind of like better context for that, all of my works are made from a collection of materials that what I have referred to in the past as like kind of the studio debris. These materials are old paintings, older works, bought fabric, bought materials, but relatively everything is 2-dimensional and anything that I could fit through a sewing machine. So I don't know how many of you have seen the works in the show or are familiar with some of my other paintings, but basically all of my paintings are comprised of these various materials, which are old works, painted works, fabric, other materials I've collected. And the way that everything is kind of held together is through sewing. So the works are stitched together. So like you would see a collage or a traditional collage that has different kind of paper materials glued, I stitch together different fabrics, other kind of 2D materials, and they kind of build a more 3-dimensional collage, more of an assemblage that is then stretched over a stretcher frame. And because of the relationship to the stretcher frame and to canvas, I consider these works paintings, and I still speak about them as paintings because the way in which they're thought about and also the way in which they're presented to audiences is in traditional painting form. The 2 older works in the show, they were made from this process of just pulling randomly from the scraps of my studio, and because of that, those works leaned more towards abstraction, because when I was making them, it wasn't an end goal in mind. Once I was made aware that those were works that were going to be included in the exhibition, and thinking about a new work, I wanted it to be formally in line with those pieces. So some of the ways in which those works are made are similar, and also the composition of like a singular figure against a kind of relatively empty background, a figure floating in like a liminal space. Those parts are consistent, but I wanted to focus on a woman and her womb and all of those kind of more conceptual aspects of the work because that's what the inspiration I drew from Georgia O'Keeffe for that. That's kind of like my prompt to myself for that painting. But yeah.
So I have 4 pieces, sculptures in the show, and they are made in a manner that I've been working for a while, where they're welded, basically welded lines. The material is steel, and one thing that I like to highlight is that the normal or like a common usage of this kind of steel, it's usually like a square of different gauges, like 1/2 inch, 1 inch, or 2 inch. Is usually like gates or fences. So like I go to the metal supply store, and people who buy them are probably going to use them to make your standard kind of linear gates and fences. And so I'll get back to that in a second. But one thing, so I usually I weld them, and then I cover them with fabric, a linen, which at this point is a linen that's been treated to be outside, because then it lasts longer. But it's like linen also has that association with painting that you were talking about. It's interesting that and also I'm using it in a craft way. So I cut up strips and I cover the metal with it, and then I paint those strips. And similarly to what Chaba was saying, I think that one of the key points of my work is that it kind of calls upon, but in a way refuses to kind of exist in any specific category. Like, it's definitely sculpture in that it's three-dimensional, but it also has aspects, really strong aspects that relate to painting, the canvas, the actual paint, line drawing, and then the first series that I did of this work, I forget what it was called, but basically the idea behind it was that I was taking letter forms, or I was working with some of the formal aspects of the alphabet and making a utopian alphabet. So one of the things about the works is that as you move around it, the shape changes quite a lot. Like this line drawing that's in 3 dimensions will go from being kind of an open shape to sometimes resembling a letter, maybe a figure, and then as the lines overlap, as you turn around it, it'll like kind of collapse in on itself and be more maybe like a drawing. And so I like the fact that I guess it relates to like the way that I think of ways of being in the world that are more unfixed and mutable and changing, because I think that allows for more possibility. And I just want to go back to the fence thing, which is that, fences divide, fences keep people in, they keep people out. They're usually built in fear. They also are, what is used for, to keep people in prison, unfree. Free is a theme that maybe we can come back to, but, and so for me, it's almost like an appropriation to take that material and make something that is open, airy, mutable, unfixed, So I've been working with this in this way for several years now, and and there's four pieces in that series in the gallery.
Yeah. And Molly, when you think about these 4 sculptures and sort of the way that they're installed here versus ways that they've been installed in other places, do you see the work, does it shift for you at all, or is there different ways that people engage with it depending on the space that it's in?
I mean, I only was here, I don't totally know how people engage with it, because I was here during the opening, and honestly, I feel like people were spending more time with the paintings. That was just maybe my subjective experience. Like, are people looking at my art? I don't know. I loved the installation. We talked a lot about it. Like, they kind of, because they're almost like corners in a very, they are corners, but they're so open that you might not notice that. That's another way that I think of it as kind of breaking down a known quantity, is like, instead of being 4 corners making a square, they're 4 corners that can move and make different kinds of spaces. And you're kind of forced, happily, the way that, and very intentionally, the way that the show was installed, you're kind of forced to interact with them as you walk through the gallery and interact with the other works. And so I think that's really important, because part of it is that, when you look at a painting, there's more or less one perspective. You can kind of shift side to side. And these pieces, I would want people to engage with them in different ways, and kind of be like, oh, what happens if you stand right next to it and you look up there and there's like, paint in different parts of it, so that you could be like, kind of discover things and kind of interact with it over time. So, yeah.
I think for both of your bodies of works that are in the exhibition, paintings and these sculptures, and the way that visitors and the way that viewers really interact with them, and sort of, with the sculptures walk around and move around and then discover, but Tschabalala with the paintings, the way that people sort of get up close and then sort of back away and are really getting this idea of, oh, what is the process? What is the material? What are the various elements of these works that sort of come together to make them? Because I think that's a question, with the sculptures, like, what are these made of? And then it's like, oh, it's steel and it's linen, and things that would be clear and are clear after people spend more time with them, but really that first view and that first blush is something I think that people really take in a lot. And Tschabalala, I was really drawn to this idea of you sort of in your studio with all of your scraps sort of around you, and as you're picking them and adding them. Where are you getting these materials? How do you sort of start? I know it probably becomes sort of a collective process eventually, but where do you go? Do you buy fabric? Do you sort of collect fabric?
Well, the fabric that I use it's half fabric that I've purchased, and the other half comes from my family's home, because my mother actually collected a lot of fabric. So it's kind of a mixture of that. if I have just like 1 yard of fabric, because I'm using such small parts of it, it can last like years. So I have fabric that I've had for a long time that I've purchased, fabric that I have for a long time because it's been in my family's home. And also when I go someplace else, especially when I go abroad and they have different ways of producing textiles, I'll like to purchase fabric there as well. I travel to Italy a lot for work, so one of my galleries is there, and I always purchase fabric there because of they make a lot of fabric there in that country, and especially like in Prado, and a very high quality fabric that's way less expensive there than it would be back home in New York. Apart from the fabric, the other kind of material is older paintings. So when I'm kind of describing the process, sometimes I'll say that people sometimes forget that canvas is a textile. So I treat canvas, like painted canvas, unpainted canvas, as like fabric as well. So it's no kind of like hierarchy in the studio as like what's more valuable than the next. Like I try to keep all the materials, treat them all the same. So just working in the studio too generates a lot of material. The reason why this process has been really helpful for me is that it's been super productive and cathartic too, because even if I'm working on something and it's like a failed work or unsuccessful painting, it can still be reappropriated. Because something that doesn't work out like how I would want it to be, it just becomes kind of recycled within the studio, and it just becomes material post like a work. So just from working, making mistakes in the studio, buying fabric, finding things, collecting things, that's kind of where all the materials come from.
Can you maybe talk about that a little bit, sort of for both of you, this process of being in the studio and this idea of mistakes? Because I think so often, with artists, and when you go to a museum and the work that you're seeing is very much, okay, this is the finished product, this is what the artist has agreed, either in the case of contemporary artists, to lend to the museum or has been purchased and sold. So it's finished in a way, but I guess for you particularly, because you are using these materials and other paintings and ways that they're coming together, what constitutes something that is a failure?
Sometimes the paintings won't have any movement to them. So because each one of my paintings is meant to be a portrait, or it's meant to be, they're not real people, but they're more imaginary people. I want them to have this liveliness to them. So sometimes I feel like paintings will shut down. And when the paintings shut down and there's no movement to the work, that's where I feel like that's like an unsuccessful painting. And unfortunately, a lot of times with those works, the more you try to add to them, the more they shut down. So you kind of just need to just kind of start all over again. So yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Melanie?
Yeah, I love that idea of, I think of a lot. So with my work, I think about systems in my work and in my life and in a lot of things that I do. And and I think a lot about the system of making art and like, and the materials. And I love the way that you talked about like things getting recycled. And in a way, there's like no failure. There's just like a reuse of the work. And I don't know. I guess I wanted to make a connection with like, I feel like just thinking about what we discard in this culture, not only just like materials and objects, but also like the way we do, like people sometimes become disposable. I've heard people talk about that, and like, certain populations are like, like not valued or something like that. So I know that's an abstract idea, but for me, those things are connected. And for me, also with my artwork, I've done every kind of medium because I sort of was self-taught. I was a writer, and then I started making art in my 20s, and I started making sculpture, and I never actually took a painting class, so that's the one thing I'm like, I still want to be a painter, even though I am, maybe, I don't know. But so when I learned to weld, the thing that I loved the most about it was that it's actually quite, like the metal pieces are quite reusable, so I kind of do the same thing, like I'll weld forms, and then I'll kind of make a piece, and if I don't like it, I'll cut it off and put it in the corner. I don't know, I know you can buy the studio, but I don't know. My shop is like crazy because I will not throw anything away because I'm like, I'll maybe add to it, and and I probably should throw more stuff away, but and that feels gratifying to me, to be able to rework pieces, like for instance, I'm wearing this ceramic piece and I do some work in ceramics, but like that you cannot redo ceramics, like you can't reuse, maybe you could, but like once you fire it, that's what you have, and if it breaks, it's, doesn't function. So yeah, I like, for me, welding is that, yeah, also.
And you sort of touched on that you've had you've moved through different mediums and different materials, but your practice also has other parts to it, not just sort of the sculpture and not just sort of what we see in the exhibition, but some of it relates to some of the programming and different conversations that you've been having while first you were here quickly for the opening, but then when you've been back. Molly has been here, since Monday? So a whole week. We asked a lot of our artists, and they're very generous with their time, and we very much appreciate it. But can you talk a little bit about that part of your practice?
Yeah, for sure, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, I was really excited to be here and to get to know different parts of the community here, and it's been so amazing to be part of this, museum exhibition, and everyone's been wonderful. So a bunch of my friends are here from Task. Was a teen action support center. Yeah, I mean, basically, so this, and we're all wearing pieces of this artwork that I'm wearing as well. A few years ago, I made this was the first piece that I made, and it consists, I made 1,000 of these double chain links. Well, actually, I made a bunch of lengths of the ceramic chain link that were longer, and I hung them on the wall of the gallery where I had a show, and it's called Free and Not Yet, and the idea was that everyone who came to the gallery was invited to select one of the double chain links, and they were given twine, and they were going to take the piece with them. And it was a piece that is based in I also do activism, or I don't know if you call it activism. I'm part of several different groups. I'm part of a tiny house building collective, which is kind of interesting. I'm trying to create a ceramics collective at my studio so people can have access to ceramics, and I really want to do a food co-op in my neighborhood, and so some friends that were talking about that. So anyway, I'm really interested in, so I was talking about how my work was based in kind of the utopian alphabet, and after I did the first version of that, I was thinking about, utopia is this place that doesn't exist, it means no place, and I started seeing and paying more attention to the ways that people are building kind of different social structures within our world that we all live in, and that they're accessible, and they really are creating different kinds of relationships with each other, and that I think are much more beneficial and much healthier than a lot of the kind of social and economic structures that are the most widespread in our culture right now. And everyone's heard of a co-op. It's not like some crazy idea, but sort of putting energy and attention into them, and also, so those are some of the things that I'm interested in, and the artwork became, for me, in the art context, like most art is generally, there's installations and varieties of things, but in general, it's something that's owned by one person or one institution. And one thing that interested me about this piece was that it's literally collectively owned. It's owned. A piece of it is owned by every single person who has a part of the chain or who comes and participates by taking a chain. You're a participant when you wear it, or when you take it, or when you own it, or when you, even if you look at it, I suppose too. But wrapping it up, I was able, so I'm going to do an event here tomorrow with the chain links.
From 1 to 3? From
1 to 3, and you're invited to come and participate. And I did the event and also some workshops at Task Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and it's been wonderful. I think I covered everything.
Yeah. And Shaba, I know you've been here also for a few days and doing different programs as well. And can you talk a little bit about that, and also just how that relates to your practice overall?
Probably the most extensive program I've done was with Stitches. I went to Springdale yesterday, and I met with a group of young people there, and together we did an exercise that I've been doing more recently with a project that kind of runs parallel to the kinds of works I have here in this exhibition. I have a project called Bodega Run, and it's actually an examination of New York City bodegas. So
does everyone know what a bodega is?
Yeah, well, I'd say there's a kind of store that exists mostly in the Northeast. You find them a lot in New York. They also have them also in New Haven, Connecticut, where my studio is at. But traditionally, they were stores that were mostly owned by people from Puerto Rico or people from Dominican Republic. The ownership has shifted more recently to Yemeni. So I think a lot of times the ownership is more in line with a group of people that have recently come from a different place outside of the city. But these stores are predominantly in Black and Latinx communities and in metropolitan areas in the Northeast. When I grew up in Harlem, these stores were like everywhere. They're still there for the most part. They kind of, the function of the store has been to kind of fill in the gap for a supermarket. A lot of times in these communities, there'll be food deserts, so there wouldn't be supermarkets there. And along with there not being supermarkets, there maybe wouldn't be very many banks, or there wouldn't be pharmacies, or those kind of things. So the store kind of stands in for all of those institutions. The store will have an ATM, it will sell Tylenol, it will sell eggs, it will have a hot sandwich, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where the origins of the store comes from. It's an interesting space because in a lot of ways it's very empowering and very uplifting because it's an example of Black ownership in these communities, which you don't often see. It's also a space where there are people of color serving other people of color, which is something that's kind of a unique economic system a lot of times in these cities. And those are all the kind of the more positive aspects of these stores. Another way in which I found these stores really interesting is that they're kind of like microcosms too for kind of like the African diaspora, because you have people of African descent from the Caribbean, people are from Puerto Rican or Dominican who own these stores in predominantly Black American communities. And even now with the individuals from Yemeni who own the stores, even though Yemen is not an African country, it's still adjacent to that continent, and its relationship to Islam or other things has a very specific connection to Harlem culturally, even though it might not have the same connection racially. So in a very, it's a very multicultural space, and in that sense, it's kind of fascinating. So those are all the more positive elements of those kind of stores, but at the same time, like other transactional spaces, there's some negative elements. There are ways in which these stores kind of exploit people a little bit financially in the neighborhood. The products there are usually of lesser value for a little bit higher price. Also to just, it's a question as to what are the ways in which these stores are maybe kind of trying to elevate things for the community. Are they providing goods and services that are needed or helpful, or are they providing things that kind of pander to some of the more negative aspects of what help people engage in the community? So I think this space is really fascinating because it has this complexity, and in many ways it could be analogous to a lot of the other things are going on in the community at large. So it's kind of like this, it's kind of a mirror of sorts. So I spoke to the students, I spoke to the young adults at Stitches about this, and I asked them to kind of look at some of the stores or institutions. Or I like to consider these stores institutions because a lot of times in communities you don't have like formal institutions like museums or like universities, but so these kind of stores which become part of everyday life are kind of institutions of these spaces. So I asked them to kind of look around their community and kind of take a second look at the spaces that exist there, especially the spaces of commerce. I think spaces of commerce are particularly interesting and important, especially in an American context. It's something that's kind of like goes across state lines because a store for many people is the first time where you enter an environment and you kind of are assigning values to things. And I've been reading some sociologists have written a lot about significance of malls in America. There's a huge mall culture in America. They said that malls are important because of this reason, and so in this way it can be almost akin to a church. You go to the space and you're asserting a certain value, you're going to the space and you're spending money that is associated with your labor, your time. So for that reason, I said for them to pay extra attention to maybe a store, a space of commerce, a place of transaction. So together as a group, we went to the gas station that was across the street from the place that we were at, and they just took a second look. It was more of a meditation. It wasn't a goal to have like any kind of conclusion at the end. Like, I didn't want them to leave this space and say, this is a good space, this is a bad space. It was more just to go and experience the space anew, and just to understand, just to ask himself again, why is this space here? How is it functioning? How am I functioning within this space? and just to meditate on those thoughts. But it was interesting because I had never done that before with other people.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, we had a really great conversation. The conversation really evolved much far past the space and past my project. It just became very, very introspective talk. And that's kind of the whole purpose of these kind of things. So I think it was successful ultimately.
Nice. And when you do that process for yourself as you're working on the bodega run, then sort of what is your next step after you've sort of gone to the spaces and had this meditative interaction and observation?
Well, I'm still working on the project, so I'm still trying to figure that out. Right now, when you begin to unpack a space like that, so many things come to mind. So at this point, I'm still just having so many more questions. So I'm hoping to land on some kind of conclusion about what the overall significance of this project will be. But right now, it just has been mostly just very generative. So I'm thankful for that aspect of it. So yeah, I'm still working on it.
One of the things that we talked a little bit about yesterday when we had dinner was this idea of place. I think, being here at Crystal Bridges and being here in Northwest Arkansas, it's a very particular place, right? It's a very particular part of our country. We're in a very particular setting right now. So this idea of having an exhibition and working with contemporary artists and really bringing them here and bringing them to the space and bringing the work that's made really in all different places, and really wanting to think about that, like how and does place matter so much for your work? Does the location of either where you make it or where it shows, how does that affect the work, or does it at all?
Well, I kind of wanted to, before
Yeah.
I answer that, I wanted to kind of follow up on something that Chava said, or what she was saying about these spaces of commerce. And, it's one other aspect that seems maybe obvious, but I guess I wanted to touch upon again of the pendants, is that there's chain has this aspect of, repression and but it also has this aspect of connection. And for me, I think that tension is interesting. I mean, with the ceramic, hopefully, like for instance, when I first made the first link, I was like, oh my God, it's like kind of scary looking. It's like this chain hanging on the wall, and it was like kind of interesting to present it in a way that it signified what I wanted. But one of the things that I did want to signify is this connection, which there is this, clay is handmade, and anyway, it's where that aspect. And I guess, in some of my thinking about, you're talking about these spaces of commerce, and like one of my interesting thoughts about one of the thoughts about that I think is interesting about where we are right now is like, there's this idea that as humans we all have this kind of innate connection, and like in this very literal sense right now we're all connected through capital, right? Because like in the internet and all these things, there's all these connections that are very literal, and I guess I like kind of bringing attention to that and thinking about it and thinking about how we are connected through the goods that we buy and the goods that we make. I mean, as artists, I'm invested in the power of an object that I make with my hands, and everything that we use and wear and like find in stores is like made by people, and we're kind of if I believe that we're connected because of this chain, we're also connected to the people who made all of the stuff that we wear. I mean, that's sort of what to me art, as Maura said, is like there's something powerful about paying attention to the objects that we interact with, and art is one way to do that, but I also think like paying attention to what's in the store is another way of doing that. And I also like what I've heard you say about like the body is the common denominator in like the paintings, and the way that so sorry, I just had to elaborate in my
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. I think that's what's interesting about art is that, as you know, probably galleries are relatively, this gallery is different and this building is extraordinary and different, but like galleries have a commonness usually.
For sure.
And so I don't feel that it feels different than other places that I've shown. And then the folks that I've been working with at the museum and then in the off-sites, I'm like, I feel so like connected. I'm like, someone said yesterday, I feel like we've known each other for forever. And I was like, I know. So, that's really amazing. And I think I am curious, and I'm not really, as an artist, you almost never witness people appreciating your work, Maybe that's why I do those pendant pieces, because I get to be there and everyone's like, this is awesome, and like you get to participate in the consumption of your work. So I guess I don't really know. I'm definitely you hope that it has an impact and that it stimulates people's thinking and feeling and seeing, you know. The ultimate goal is to kind of shift your perceptions just a little bit, and I would imagine it would make a difference of like where you come from and what assumptions you bring.
Yeah.
I'll just say, there was a fellow on the airplane over here, we were talking about art, and he was like, I didn't like that. I mean, I don't know if he said this, but basically I got the sense he did not like abstract art. And I was like, I make abstract art. And then he wanted to see it, and I was like, I can't do that right now.
You're like, I don't know if you're gonna.
He's like, are you looking on your phone? And I was like, I'm really tired. I can't look at it right now.
Later.
But you know, it was like, oh, I think once I said I'm an actual art, he kind of was like, oh, like what is that? So I don't know if that's, I mean, this is so anecdotal, but it's the experiences that I'm having, you know?
Yeah, and I think I think it's those interactions that can sort of push someone a little bit, or there's that sort of that, oh, I don't like this type of art, or oh, I don't like this particular piece or whatever, but then when there's actual conversation with the artist or with someone who knows the work a little bit better, it's really able to open up those conversations and open up that sort of, you know, maybe he's not going to say, oh, I love abstract art now, but he's like, oh, I met an abstract artist, so I can, so I think that's one of the nice things about being able to have those conversations, though as annoying as they probably can be sometimes for artists, I think.
Well, I guess we spoke about this yesterday, but because the work has to do so much with, well, the paintings aren't portraits or anything, but they do have a lot to do with me. So I feel like the shifting of location doesn't really affect so much how I experience the work. And I think that because it's figuration, that most people can identify with the work, or at least imagine how to interact with it. Figuration is like less opaque than maybe abstract work, so I think it's easier for people to interact with it. So for that, I feel like it's been, it hasn't really shifted so much. But with the new project, where the figures like inject into a very unique environment that's kind of very regionally specific to like where I'm from, people ask a lot of questions about the space, but ultimately they'll kind of come back with an anecdote about some kind of environment that they feel like is similar in their own communities, which I found very interesting. And that's happened both here and abroad. So that part has been really interesting to me. And it kind of clarified this idea that I had that these kind of spaces exist everywhere. I think that those conversations are leading me closer to the conclusion of this project, which is what is this space, and why are these kind of spaces made for certain groups of people, essentially. I think that's leading me towards that question, or the answer to that question. So.
Do you all have questions for each other? I know you've had some phone calls, and then over the last day or so, some conversations or other things that we touched on that I just didn't touch on that we want to talk about before we open it up.
You?
Sure. No pressure, and you can always throw it out and talk about it. But I also know that we touched on this a little bit, Molly, about this idea of freedom as a theme, and this idea of free. I don't know if there was more that you wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, I love any opportunity to talk about some of the other work that I do that I don't consider a part of my art, but when I start to think or talk about it, it becomes very obvious. So I'm a member of a group called California Coalition for Women Prisoners, and it was founded by women who were in prison, and they were basically, I think I just learned today, there was a lawsuit because one of the prisoners was having like huge health concerns that weren't being addressed, and so they actually brought a lawsuit. But and it's a coalition of women who are inside and people who are outside, and so I'm a part of that. And there's a lot of other artists and people in my community are part of that. And it's based in this. I mean, and you know, this piece is called "Free and Not Yet." Obviously, the chain, and then "free" as like it's given away. And then I talked a little bit about disposable populations. I mean, I guess I would just sum it up by saying I think I found my way into that form of organizing and its relationship to my work by kind of, I think, asking this question. I think it's an important question to ask, of like, who is being ignored, who's being made invisible. I mean, I'm not the first person to ask this, but it's something that's really important. Like, who isn't being seen or who doesn't have a voice? And definitely, like, people in prison are made to be invisible. They're made to disappear once that happens. And they're us. I mean, there's certainly mostly people of color, but like, and poor people, but, and so that is not a coincidence, you know, that is the case. But I think it's a good I think it's a good way to start thinking differently about the world, which is what I try to get my art to do and what I try to do myself all the time, you know. It's challenging. Whenever I hear something, I'm like, how does that challenge me because that's how we make the world, is our thoughts about the world make the world. So if I think the world is a dangerous, horrible place where half the population needs to be locked up for me to be safe, that is what is going to exist. And I absolutely don't believe that. And so I think by actually also hanging out and working with people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, like you just are like, oh, like I want to say it's bad luck, it's not bad luck, it's a system. You know, I'll just say one more thing, this writer, Rachel Kushner, just wrote this book about prison, and she was like, it's not bad luck, it's not that I have better luck, it wasn't designed for me. And that's the thing about prison, is it's not designed for me. So I have to be active and going and looking and seeing what's going on there, because otherwise how I was born, my, you know, everything, color of my skin, my socioeconomic status, my education, means otherwise I probably wouldn't have touched cross paths with it. So, I love to speechify about that. I will say this, I get so much more out of this work than I do, and I do a lot. We're organizing an art auction right now, and it's just really important. It's important to my life, and therefore it's important to my art.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I guess I teased opening it up, but I do want to ask a question that is honestly a very sort of like basic question, but it's something that I get not asked. When did I, become, or when did I know as an artist, but more of when did I know as a curator, all that. So for you, when was that moment when you sort of started identifying as an artist, or knew that's what you wanted to do?
Maybe when I was much younger. Like I've always made art, even as a child. But maybe when I was like a teenager, I started to identify as an artist. So.
And you stuck with it.
Yeah. Luckily, I was able to stick with it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was a writer. I wanted to be a writer. I grew up partially in rural Idaho, and there weren't any other kids, and I read a lot. So I always was very bookish. And then I had this kind of epiphany in my 20s where I met some artists and I looked at what they were doing. I always thought I couldn't be an artist because I couldn't draw, like that thing of like, I don't know how to draw. And there weren't really artists in my family. I didn't have any exposure. And then I met these artists, and it was actually sculpture, and it's related to this thing of like, all of a sudden, like the material world was a language that I was like, I speak this language. Like color had something that I understood, and it just meant something to me, and wood and plastic. I just had this sense of material, and so I was like, I'm going to be a sculptor, and it was like pretty immediate. Like I said, it was kind of an epiphany, and I was like, I'm not going to write anymore. That's way too complicated. And of course, art is also very complicated.
Yeah. Really simple, no problem. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Now we can open it up for questions, and there'll be a microphone coming. I can answer from the curator side. So for this exhibition, really, Tschabalala, who's the co-curator of this exhibition with me, he and I, one of the best parts about being a contemporary curator and a curator who works a lot with living artists is that you get to know artists, and artists also know artists, and even if you've maybe not done a studio visit or you've not had a conversation with an artist, particularly now, sort of in the age of Instagram and sort of being able to see what people are doing, you're keeping track of people. So you're sort of following along and sort of seeing what artists are doing or what shows are going to gallery shows, but also, different schools who have great MFA programs and maybe who are some of the graduates that are in those programs, and really just how these relationships develop. And also particularly I always pay attention to curators who I really like, and I think they do great work. And so they work with some really amazing artists. So really starting these ideas that even if it's maybe an artist who doesn't fit for a certain project, you're always sort of keeping them in mind. So and this is the same for Chad. So really, when we were thinking about this exhibition and coming up with this idea of using the themes that O'Keeffe became really well known for as a jumping off point to really engage with contemporary art here at the museum, really wanting to think about who are artists who are doing innovative things. And when we think about abstraction, when we think about the body, when we think about landscape, when we think about floral themes, like who are these artists? So that started with lists, and then conversations, and then studio visits. But really, and for these two specific artists, I feel like Chad, maybe, I don't know if you all had a visit before, had a conversation, Molly, before, but I feel like you were on his radar a little bit, and I also wonder, because we did reach out to other artists when we were going to LA, and maybe I think someone recommended you and doing a studio visit that way. And Shaba, I just have known your work for a while, probably. I can't actually remember the first time I saw it, but where Shaba's in residence now at the Studio Museum is where I used to work. So there's just different circles and different ways of how that happens. And for you all, I guess, how was that sort of, that email or that, oh, hey, we want to come to your studio, sort of how did that work on your end?
Well, I think that you emailed me, Lauren, and I knew you from the Studio Museum. I don't think we ever met before, but
Okay.
I knew of you from the other curators there, like Amanda. And also, too, a lot of times when I would tell people about my friend Lauren Halsey, and I'll say she did the Studio Museum, I'm like, oh, Lauren Haynes? Yeah, so confused.
Different Lauren.
Yeah, so from that, too.
Yeah, I guess I would just share that because it's kind of funny that a friend of Chad's recommended that you do a studio visit with me, and I was like, what museum? I mean, I'm just saying that. I was like, what? And I was like, okay. And then I met you and Chad, and I was like, oh my God, I love these people are so, like, I just felt so much resonance with how you described, the show and the museum and your ideas about being here, and I think I expressed a lot of interest in coming here and engaging from the very beginning. It's like I really wanted to engage with the community because it's a place, a part of the country I've never been, and I was really curious, and so I felt like a really, but I didn't know anything was going to come of it. I was psyched, super happy that I got to be in the show. Yeah. Sorry I didn't know about it. Now everyone knows about Crystal Bridges.
Now you do.
It's very well regarded in all over now, but it was still kind of new.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Joy Sanders, and I'm 15 years old. This question is directed to both of you. Do you believe that art is the expression of your soul? And if so, in what ways has that shaped you into the person that you are today?
An easy one.
Easy question.
Okay, you should go first.
I'll wing it. Yes, I'll go with yes. I think that we talked about this in the workshops that we did over the last few days. One of the things about the pendants, another aspect of it, it's funny how much mileage I can get from this one thing, has to do with the idea of gifts. And I've read a lot and I've thought a lot about gifts in the, not as in material gifts, but just sort of this sense of generosity and abundance. And I have this idea that I like to communicate through the artwork and verbally that we live in a state of abundance because we're born, and then the earth provides everything that we need to live until we start doing different things with that stuff. That's my starting premise. And so I also think that your inclination is also a gift. And my girlfriend is a nurse, and she thinks it's really fun to heal people in the ER. And that sounds so terrible to me, you know? And so like, and I just marvel at it every time because I'm like, that's her gift. And the gift isn't that she can do it, the gift is that she wants to do it. Yeah. And that it's useful to other people. And so for many years, I felt like making art was kind of selfish. I kind of wanted to be a nurse. I thought, oh, that's like a more useful thing. And I don't feel like that anymore. So as far as the expression of my soul, I just know that it's part of my purpose of being, you know, alive. And I know that mostly because I like to do it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like when I was young, I had pretty supportive parents, but I don't think in general people are like, what do you know, I don't know if people do or not, but I think that like going towards the things that bring you joy is probably a good plan.
Yeah. I feel like I'm really thankful that I have my art. I'm really thankful that I have something that I can kind of put all my experiences into, put my thoughts into. When you're an artist, I guess depending on what kind of artist you are, like I'm a painter, you spend a lot of time by yourself. Painters spend a lot of times by themselves. So I think as like a young woman, it's nice to learn that skill, spending time alone, spending time by yourself, meditating in your own space. I had to become independent in a lot of ways to allow for my practice. I've had to become like brave in a lot of ways to do the kind of work that I do. Not initially, but now at this point in regards to like traveling, going places, I would maybe at first feel like I wouldn't have any place to be in or wouldn't know anyone there. Having to do those kinds of things I've matured a lot through those experiences. Traveling to different states, different countries, interacting with a lot of different kinds of people. Because artists interact with a whole spectrum of people. You interact with people from every level of what people would say society. But you interact with a lot of different kinds of people. Most people in their life don't interact with so many different kinds of people as artists do. In doing that, I think you learn a lot of empathy, sympathy, getting a lot of perspective. I don't know if those things help you express your soul any better, but I think that they improve you as a kind of quality of person you are. Whatever you have, those experiences will improve you as an individual if you take them on wholeheartedly and sincerely. Also, too, like having to express yourself. When you're trying to communicate to other people, there's a certain kind of self-reflection that's involved in that to do that effectively. Having to be self-reflective, be open to critique. Those things, I think, too, will improve you as an individual. And ultimately, too, I guess like the goals that you have as an artist or goals you have in your studio are kind of mirror, I guess, the goals of that you would have in your life. You want to become, I guess, like self-actualized, you know? Having goals that you want to complete, sharing, generosity, openness, honesty. All of those kind of skills you have to cultivate, I think, to really be successful as an artist. I think those are all things that I guess would involve like your soul or your humanity, improving those aspects of yourself.
This is sort of a lighter follow-up question. I'm very curious about your creative process. You know, you're talking about where the inspiration comes from, but is it a combination? You walk into your studio, you see something, a fence or a found object, and something starts to emerge? Or is it you're over coffee and walking down the street, you get a concept, and then you go in and pull objects together to create a piece? You know, what's your creative process? Are there aha moments, or are there like, it just comes, or what's the deal?
I mean, kind of all of the above, I guess, for me. I mean, I make almost all aspects of my work pretty much are made intuitively, like the forms. I don't really draw them out beforehand. It doesn't work. I can't see them. I can see them. The first forms, like the sculptures that are in this show, I actually saw when I was like kind of meditating, and so I could see it in my mind, and I can turn the pieces around in my mind in a way that I can't if I was trying to draw it, you know, because it's just flat. And then I paint them also intuitively. Like I'll have a direction, and then like I'll often. I mean, I'm kind of always pushing against this, but like usually I'll be like, okay, I'm going to do a series, and so they'll be the same height and the same material, and I'll kind of improvise within that. So it's like improvising with deciding what the kind of structure is of the show or the piece, and then improvising within that. That works really well for me. But I also want to share that like I make so much stuff that like just goes in the garbage, and like you know, like I have this joke, and it's true that like whenever I finish a body of work, when I start a new one, I'm like, I'm gonna be an oil painter. And like I do it every time. Like I like pull out my oil paints and then I do it, and then I'm like, oh, I hate this, you know. And then like, but I like oil painting, so I want to be able to do it, but it just isn't my thing. So I just want to say like I don't know. I experiment a lot, and then I end up often doing something kind of coming back to what I am more familiar with. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Molly that it's sometimes you walk down the street and you get an idea, or sometimes it's more about like processing thoughts or experiences that you've had. I think I get most of my ideas, I mean, even if you think you're getting an idea in a moment, I like a lot of times something that you've been thinking about for a long time, maybe subconsciously. But I feel like it's a lot about processing all the information that you're given so much information in the course of a day. Things that you see, things that you read, things that people you interact with. You're finally alone in your studio, and you're trying to, I guess, think about what you want to make or what you want to communicate. A lot of times, just your mind kind of just filtering all that information and kind of filtering it down to like more of a one condensed idea. So I think that's kind of like what my process is like a lot of the time.
Any other questions?
So I've been thinking about this recently a lot because I work with young people that you've met. And you guys being Crystal Bridges sort of, in a way, validates or affirms you guys as artists, right? I was just curious about your thoughts about validation and affirmation as it relates to young people, and when you felt sort of those points in time as artists that you felt validated, and when that happened, that allowed you to continue. Does that make sense? I mean, points of validation, because this is huge, right? But there were probably points in your past that I'm just interested to hear about.
Do you want to go?
Okay. Yeah, I think that is really important for young people, especially to feel validated. I think that everyone needs that, like at any age, you know. But outside of the validation, I think it's like more important for them to be to simply acknowledge, because validation is going to come and go. But if you feel like you're at least acknowledged, like that people see you, and that you are at least being, you know, people are seeing you, acknowledging you. I think that might be the thing to focus on more, or at least try to teach people to maybe focus on that more, because the validation can become tricky, because sometimes you are not validated, sometimes you're invalidated. I mean, you still have to be able to function despite that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I shared at you know, when I talked about like when I first started making art, like I had this period because I was living abroad where it was like really free and open, and then as soon as I came back to like home, which was New York at the time, like I was like, I need to be successful, and I mean, it was, I don't know, it was important to be like motivated and want to be seen. I mean, I feel like for me, like, you know, there's parts of art of just like really wanting to be seen and also like not be seen. That's why art's kind of great. You can like make this thing that's seen. And that was, I think, a dynamic that was happening for me for a long time. And I mean, I guess I just maybe encouraging the part that is like self-driven, like the desire to make something, the validation that whatever you make is important, and to keep exploring what is the most interesting and intriguing to the person, because like Chava says, like, I mean, it's great to have validation, right? But it's like you don't always have it, and then if you become about that, then you're kind of trapped. You're trapped in what you make, and you know, I mean, like when I was first starting out, it wasn't so common for young artists to be become well known or to have success so quickly. But it seems to be going okay. I remember going like, oh, these kids are gonna just all be messed up, and I don't think that's true either. I think like, you know, validation is good if that's the case, but you need to self-validate and have I also shared that like having a community that I was in dialogue with, as opposed to wanting validation from galleries or collectors or museum curators and like that sort of thing, is just, there's very few people who really get to that kind of validation. And so when I started paying more attention to my friends and peers and community, then that validation was really important. Because art is very solitary, and I love that about it, but like, it can be dangerous in your head to just be like totally, the interaction with others for me is an important part of it, but yeah, so community is important for me.
Any other questions? Any last questions, thoughts? Well, for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition, or for those of you who just need a second or third or fourth or 20th visit, the museum is open until 9, so definitely spend some time there. Thank you all for coming. Molly, thank you. Shaba, thank you so much. Really happy to have had this time to chat, and thank you guys.